Hi, and welcome to part 4 of the 5-part series on co-teaching. I'm Dr. Melanie Lemoyne. If you're just joining us, or if you've been with us for the first 3 sessions, you'll know that I'm starting each session with People First Language. Understanding People First Language is important for us as educators because we know that the language we use to describe people has an impact on the way that we see them. And this is not an intentional thing. It happens. So when we use words like handicapped or disabled, that impacts the way that we can see students in terms of their potential. And we know that expectations are critically important for the success of students. Students will reach the expectation we set for them. And so specifically for students with disabilities, it's important for us to think about them as students first, not the disability, because the disability really is only one part of their life. So instead of using words like disabled or autistic or SPED kids, let's shift our thinking. It's a small shift, but it has a pretty profound impact. If we move from those types of words that focus on the disability and shift to things like she's a 3rd grader who also happens to have a learning disability and she's really great at soccer, or he's a 6th grader and loves football, knows everything about all the NFL teams. He also has autism. If we shift our language, it's going to change the way that we see kids and especially change the way we set our expectations for them. So as always, I challenge you to make the change, shift your language, and also reach out to your peers. If you are working with friends and y'all are planning for lessons and creating content, and if you see that they are using some of that language, talk to them about it. Encourage them to make the shift as well. If you've been following along, you know that we started part 1 with an overview and definition of co-teaching. We then moved into one teach, one observe, and one teach, one assist. Again, these are not identified as hierarchical in terms of one model being better than the other. It really has to do with your learning goals, your learning objectives, and we'll cover that more when we get to planning. But we also did an overview of team teaching and parallel teaching. Today, for session 4, we're going to focus on station teaching and alternative teaching. As a reminder, we're using the definition of Dr. Friend and Dr. Cook for co-teaching. And I think the most important part of this is that second bullet when it talks about 2 professionals. So we're talking about 2 certified teachers, maybe a special ed teacher and a general ed teacher. You might be a regular ed teacher and a speech language pathologist. But you've got 2 professionals who are working together to provide meaningful instruction to a diverse classroom in a single physical space. Right now, as residents and mentor teachers, the licensure we know is not equal, but that is okay because we're working towards that. But you all will be delivering instruction in a single physical space. Co-teaching can sometimes, the term, be misused. And while we do a lot of collaboration with other professionals, which is a great thing, it's not always co-teaching. The key is that you all are both in the same room. And why do we do this? Well, IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, requires that students with disabilities not only have access to the general education curriculum, but that they make progress in. And what we're finding is the best way to do that is to bring 2 professionals together to create that dynamic classroom. But I would argue beyond special education, I think our classrooms are, which is a wonderful thing, becoming very diverse. And kids are bringing all kinds of different learning styles, learning needs, and we need to figure out a way to best meet every need in our classroom. We need to reach every kid in our room. And one really effective way to do that is when we have two professionals in there teaching collaboratively. So, station teaching. We think of station teaching in some ways as learning centers, but it's not just learning centers. It's beyond that. But if you had to think of what it would look like in a classroom, you can think of those stations that students would actually rotate through. But there are some critical pieces that have to be included in station teaching. So we do have learning areas in the classroom. And what it does is it provides the opportunity to chunk the information, whether it's into specific process or a different learning style, or just teaching something in a different way, even offering the opportunity for practice. Each station can support all of those efforts. A couple of things, though, to think about. No matter what is happening at each station, it's the same content. We're not learning three different things. We're focused on the same content. It just may be one station is an extension, another station may be a different method in terms of learning, a different methodology, and another one may be building foundational skills that support that same content. Students would be required to attend all stations. We have to be thinking in terms of movement. Movement is an important process. Kids have got to know how to rotate through the stations, and timing. How do we set up timing for each station, for the time that students participate in each station? So here again are some benefits, cautions, and guiding concepts. Again, when we think about these different stations, we can think about providing it in a new way, supporting extension activities if that's needed, and also just providing that smaller group instruction for students. However, some things to think about, you can't set up stations that sort of build upon each other. That's difficult if they have to start at station 1 in order to make sense for station 2. That's not going to work. We've got to come up with content that is supportive of each other, not building upon each other. So that's going to come into planning, and we'll talk about that as well. What would it look like? Well, here's an example. Again, the green circles would be the teacher and the blue squares would be student desks. And you can see here that with two professionals in the room, they are actually manning two stations, and one station looks to be without a teacher. And that is important because that is considered an independent station. So when we're planning, are we going to use station teaching? We need to make sure that whatever is required of students in that middle group, that middle station, that all students can do that independently. So what does that mean? Well, it depends on the needs of your students. And if you've got a non-reader in your room, having that middle station a text-dependent activity, probably we need to rethink that. So there's a lot of thinking and a lot of planning that needs to happen in terms of station teaching. But the benefits are there. Kids have access to a smaller group with their teacher. They can, as I said, build strength, build that background knowledge, and also learn things in a new way. Again, it is going to be a requirement for residents and the mentors to make sure that records are up to date. You would note co-teaching down here as station teaching. That is the ST line if you were to utilize this model in your classroom. Okay, alternative teaching. This is the method when one of the teachers is teaching the larger group and one works with a smaller group. It's going to sound familiar, like a one teach, one assist. It's going to sound similar to that. However, you are actually pulling out a smaller group of students. It's not that one person's teaching and you're sort of managing or monitoring the room. One teacher is teaching the full class of students, and you have a much smaller group of, let's say, 1 to 6 students. What typically happens here is it's not a long time that they're in that small group. It's think of it as a let's group together and quickly review what we're doing. Really check for understanding. So this could be a good opportunity for those formative assessments. Do we really know what is happening or what is expected of you in this class? Reteach and reinforce certain things, giving that almost one-on-one opportunity in that group. And of course, answering any types of questions, clarifying, that sort of thing. A couple of cautions. General education teachers and special education teachers, when they work together, we do often think of the general education teacher as the content expert and the special education teacher as the process expert, but that doesn't mean we have to stay in those roles all the time. So one thing you would want to avoid in alternative teaching would be an opportunity, a situation where it's the special ed teacher who always has the small group, and that it's always the kids with disabilities in that group. Because remember, just because a child has a learning disability doesn't necessarily mean it impacts their ability in language arts the same way it does in math. So they may not need the small group setting in certain content areas. So the caution here is to, one, avoid static grouping, and we've certainly talked about that in the previous sessions. The same kids don't need to be in the group every single time. We've got to really use student outcome data and what we know about student needs to determine that. The groups can be flexible, and they should be, but again, it doesn't always have to be the special education teacher and students with disabilities in that one group. So that's really the caution there. What it would look like, here we go. Green circles, green ovals are our teachers, and the blue squares are our students. You can see where the bulk of the kids are in that main section of the classroom. You may have a few pulled out to a small section of the room in the back or off to the side. And what's flexible about this is that the kids in that small group really can come and go. So we would not keep them there necessarily for an entire lesson. It may be, again, sort of that reteaching, establishing expectations, making sure everybody's clear on what they need to do, then send them back. Midway through, we may need to come back and do a little more work, but it is the opportunity to be flexible. And again, you would keep your records up to date of your practices using the AT line, which indicates alternative teaching. That is it for session 4, and I hope to see you in part 5.